So you'll notice there's a new background here. I would love to tell you that this is some sort of weird professional green screen, but no, I am in a hotel, currently in San Diego, having a nice week with the family, also working from San Diego, but it's pretty nice. I am literally staring at Petco Park right now, which is a nice reminder that I miss the city a lot. Some of you know that I lived in San Diego, technically Coronado, for a few years. Wasn't great on the old paycheck, but it was a wonderful place to live. But enough about my personal life, I suppose. Let's talk about the infield. We've talked about so far, and please do check out if you're new to this. We have previewed the starting pitching, we've previewed the bullpen, and now let's talk about the infield. And I'm going to include catcher in the infield. Thought about doing just a separate 10-minute video on the catching, but not that desperate for content just yet. But let's start with catcher because it's probably the position I'm most excited about, except for center field. Um, I think Cal Raleigh is one of the best catchers in baseball right now and has a chance to be one of the upper echelon catchers for a very long time. Like, he's not Adley Rutschman. He's probably not Salvador Perez. He's probably not Will Smith. But you can make an argument he's in that next tier. You can absolutely make an argument that Cal Raleigh belongs in that next tier. I mean, I think he's going to be one of those players too that benefits a lot from the limited shift, and we're going to be talking about limited shifts a lot in this episode. As you guys probably know, there are some rule changes happening in baseball, and it's going to play a major effect on a lot of teams. I think it's going to have a huge effect on the Seattle Mariners, and we'll get into that as we get deeper into the video. But I was so impressed with what Raleigh did, especially after he got called up the second time, because I think he started the year something like 1 for 16, something along those lines, and was looking like, oh boy, he needs at least a little bit more seasoning. And you were even talking about like whether or not this team needed to go get another catcher of the future, you know? And then he was pretty much amazing from that point on and delivered one of the biggest hits in Seattle Mariner history. Now, look, is that damning with faint praise a little bit? Yeah. But I don't think you can overstate how big that home run was just because of 20 years. And again, I thank my buddy Jordan Schusterman for allowing me to go to that game. So much fun. But yeah, even if you take away that homer, which I'm not going to, you see a very good defensive backstop. You see a catcher that's growing more confident with his approach at the plate. He makes hard contact. Was one of the most unlucky hitters in baseball for a large portion of there with a batting average of balls in play that did not justify how much hard contact he was making whatsoever. I think he could be a star. I think we're talking about a guy who makes plenty of all-star teams, a good chemistry guy, and also big dumper, man. How great is that? My grandma hates when I say that, by the way. She thinks it's like mean, but now that he's embraced it, I think grandma will a little bit too. Behind him, Tom Murphy, against left-handed pitching, I wonder if he's going to see some time at DH because that's the one thing I know he can do. I know he can crush left-handed pitching. What else he can do, I'm not so sure. If Raleigh went down, I don't know how confident I am in him being the starter. I've certainly seen worse. There are teams that have much worse catching situations than the Seattle Mariners, which is fun to see, to be honest with you. Not no disrespect to those guys, but it's kind of fun to see that the Mariners have this as a strength. It's a position they've had some pretty good players with, but there's been some real low points at that position as well. But catcher is the one position in this infield that I am extremely, extremely confident in. And because Murphy, I think, is going to see time as that DH, DePoto's comments, to be honest with you, about the rotating DH very much frustrated me, although I don't think there's so much DePoto's comments as they are ownership's comments. I, I think that it's very frustrating that this team did not go out and get a better offensive option for the designated hitter position. But he absolutely makes sense as a DH against left-handed pitching when you have AJ Pollock playing in left field and Jared Kelnick probably on the bench. We'll get into the Taylor Trammell injury, by the way, in the outfield next week, but absolutely a huge bummer. But because of the fact that Murphy is going to be spending some time at DH, I believe, this year, I do think a third catcher makes sense on this team. I'm not sure who that guy is. It would be really interesting to me to see if they think about making a signing. I don't see anybody on the roster that super excites me for that third catcher, but it might make sense to carry a third because of the fact that you don't want to lose that DH or heaven forbid an injury happens that you need to move Murphy behind. A third catcher, I think, is something that you absolutely have to explore. Let's go with the next position that I'm the most confident in. It's probably third base. And it's funny, I don't know how much A. Eugenio Suarez was really a throw in the Jesse Winker trade, which doesn't look great if it's just Jesse Winker. And look, the players that they gave up to get Jesse Winker are flawed. Uh, it's not like they gave up. Like, imagine if they'd given up the package for Luis Castillo. They did. Of course, they wouldn't do that. But I'm just saying, like, there's no surefire thing. There's some talented players that they gave up, but there's no surefire thing. But Eugenio Suarez is a really good baseball player. And I think people just kind of look at the average in strikeouts, and it's amazing in 2023 that we're still doing that. And yeah, strikeouts are frustrating. And, the low average isn't my favorite thing. I think there are going to be times if he's hitting fourth or fifth, be very curious to see where he's hitting, to be honest with you. But there will be times where it's very frustrating that there are runners on second and third base and he's going to strike out. And I know that frustrates people because Abraham J. Simpson really wants to see hit the ball into the play and get that run home. But he's also going to provide an awful lot of 2-run, 3-run homers. And I think his defense is solid. Behind him, I think Tommy LaStella is a solid defensive third baseman. And, it can be I talked about this on Mollywop Monday. And again, thank you guys for listening to that stuff. We get great feedback. Some of it not so nice, but it's all great feedback. But, he's a perfectly cromulent backup infielder. I don't think you're seeing the version of Tommy LaStella that you saw prior to the injuries. That's just not how time works. But I think he can be what they were hoping Jake Lamb was going to be. So I am pretty confident in third base. These next positions, I'm going to be honest with you, this is the biggest concern I have with this team. Is I have concerns about first base, second base, and shortstop. We'll save shortstop for last, and I'll do my best to not go on a tangent about shortstop. Let's start with second base. So Colton Wong, the trade that they made to get Wong was of course Winker along with Abraham Toro. It kind of funny, two of the whipping boys is probably not the right word for it, but two of the guys who probably received the most criticism last year were those guys, and justifiably so at times. Really justifiably for Toro, especially when he was a designated hitter. And that's another reason why this rotating thing really frustrates me. But Colton Wong has crushed right-handed pitching for a very long time. I think he had an 855 OPS against them last year. How is he going to translate defensively this year? Because look, I heard Dipoto on with my good buddy Ian Furness, another big part of the Mollywop Monday crew. I heard him talking about how the range wasn't a concern. I watched a lot of games. I watch a lot of baseball, as a lot of you know. It's literally been my job for the last 6 years to watch an awful lot of baseball. I don't see the same range from Colton Wong that I did back in the day. And we got to talk about this shift thing too. Now, look, it's a limited shift. It is not a banning of the shift. It's just basically going to make the extreme shifts with your infielders much more difficult. But you're still going to see stuff where you've got an outfielder playing in that spot. It's a big risk because you can give up some real extra base hit stuff, but at the same time, with how good pitchers are now and how good they are at inducing ground balls, I think you are going to see that. But it does matter. And range is going to matter more for second baseman. And it wasn't just that he was making a lot of errors. And I will say this too. Perry Hill is the best, from everybody I've talked to, best defensive coach in baseball. Bar none. as good as it gets. He makes good players great, and he takes average players and makes them good, and so on and so forth. He ups a grade. That's what he does. It's an awesome thing, and I thought DePoto's comments there were really interesting about something they recognized with his hands, with an issue with transferring the baseball, and that'll help. And look, when we talk about errors with defense, you shouldn't judge a player's defense based on how many errors they make or fielding percentage, because your fielding percentage is literally limited to what plays you can make. You don't get an error if your weak range allows a base hit. That's just not how it works. But errors are still bad. You're creating extra base runners. So errors do matter. It's just not what you should judge a defender on. You should be judging on how many runs they are saving or how many runs they are creating. So that's great. And I think that cleaning that up and getting less of that will be big. But I do have some concerns about the range. And I'd also have concerns about the fact that you're not going to be able to play him against left-handed pitchers. Never have, never will. I mean, he is a liability against left-handed pitching. Fortunately, Dylan Moore is not. And I think Dylan Moore is a solid, if unspectacular, defender at second base. Throws kind of goofy, but it gets the job done. I think that'll be a nice little platoon offensively, and I think it should be fine defensively, but I do have some concerns. Colton Wong is not getting any younger. This is not, we know how time works. Every day I wake up, I'm like, oh, I'm 39. Huh. So, and Colton Wong is approaching that old age, but he's no longer the spring chicken, and defense does not tend to get better. Let's talk about Ty France. This is a tough one. And it's not like it's a tough one like he's done something wrong or anything like that. It's just a tough one because I don't know what to expect from Ty France. I don't. It's kind of funny that I don't know what to expect from Ty France because if you look at his statistics, they're all pretty similar. Like if you look at it, like he's right around at 800 OPS every year. You can expect average rates of like 15 to 18 home runs and a decent on base percentage and a solid slugging percentage. But I really don't know what to expect from Ty France because the hitter that I watched from April to like mid June was an elite offensive option. An elite offensive option. The hitter I watched after that was somebody that you would consider a late inning replacement pinch hitter type thing. And how much of that was due to the injury, I don't know. Ty France says it wasn't due to the injury. Some beat writers I've spoken with say it wasn't really due to the injury, but they're kind of taking Ty France's word for it. I didn't see anything that necessarily said, "Oh, you don't look healthy." What I did see was a hitter that was swinging at pitches outside of the zone much more often, and I think he was trying to force things. I think that you see this sometimes from hitters that they have, they're good, and then they become great. And he was great. He was great for a very large portion of the season. And then it slipped. And I wonder if he was forcing things into saying, I need to get back to that level. So I am going to start hacking and making hard contact. And it just didn't work. It didn't at all. And look, they need Ty France to be that guy. They don't need him to be the guy who is hitting 340 with a 900 OPS, but they need him to be that guy who can be an 850 to 875 OPS guy who provides a quality amount of homers, who provides, RBI. We talk about it all the time, how it's a flawed stat, but if they're at their best, you want Ty France knocking in those runs. I would not be hitting Ty France second next year. I would not. We'll talk about what my ultimate lineup is, but I would rather have him hitting sixth or seventh, maybe fifth, just because of the fact that I don't trust him quite enough to get on base at the level of a few other guys, especially against left-handed or right-handed pitching, where I want Colton Wong getting as many at-bats as possible. So, yeah, I am not hitting him in that typical 2 spot or 3 spot. I think they're good enough now that he doesn't have to either. But that's a huge story. What is Ty France going to provide this team? Because if he is the hitter that we saw for most of the first half, things are going to be pretty darn good, I think, for this team. If he's not, I don't know. Evan White, real quickly. I don't know. I don't know. It would be great to see Evan White show the promise that he showed as a minor league player. His defense, I haven't seen him play in a while, but I imagine it's still pretty darn good. It's hard to imagine that somebody who was an absolutely elite defensive player at first base. I got to stop saying the word elite as much as possible, by the way. Um, I use it too much. It's a crux, I suppose, is the way to say that. But he was one of the best defensive first basemen in that season, his full season. But I don't care if he is like Ozzie Smith level defense at first base, or that shortstop for Baltimore who just like led the baseball and defensive war for so long. You can Google it, post it in the comments because I forget the guy's name. But it doesn't matter. You gotta hit at first base. You're just not saving enough runs to justify not hitting at first base. And he has been an awful offensive player. Give him a look. It would be great to see him be that guy because Ty France is not a great first baseman. Now he was very, very, very good in 2022, or excuse me, 2021. He's getting older, and he's got solid range. A guy who played second and third base. I would love to see him get reps at DH. That's the one thing about what DePoto said about that rotating designated hitter thing that made sense because Evan White is an infinitely better defensive player. Maybe a hot take for somebody that, Ty France has made some really fun highlight plays that we remember, but he's not great. He's not a great defensive player. So he really needs to hit. And I just don't know what level you're going to get. If you get a season of 270, 330, 440 from Ty France, which I think is really possible, that's not awful. It's not good enough. They really need him to be a truly middle of the order type hitter, but I wouldn't start him in the middle of the order. I hope that makes some sense. All right, let's talk about shortstop. J.P. Crawford is a solid baseball player. It is not an insult to J.P. Crawford that I am frustrated by what they did, or I should say, what they didn't do. I am extremely frustrated by the comments DePoto made. And again, it's not DePoto. He has to speak for ownership. And ownership is just going to not say what the reality of the situation is that they signed him to a $51 million extension, a perfectly fair deal. J.P. Crawford deserves that bag. He has been a solid 2 to 3 win shortstop for the majority of his career. He's still young. He has shown flashes of being a first division shortstop, a top 10 shortstop. But there have been flashes too, and it's much higher flashes of him being an offensive liability. And my biggest concern with Crawford is that his defense was bad last year. His defense was bad last year. He just didn't seem to get the same reads on the baseball that he was getting in 2020 and 2021. And even 2021, you started to see a little bit of a slip. But last year, there just wasn't that same defensive stuff. And look, again, we talked about it, and we're going to keep talking about it, the limited shift. It matters. It's going to matter so much more. Shortstop defenses always mattered. But you can't position that guy behind the second base bag anymore. You can't do that. You have to have him play to that full left, to that full right. It's going to be really important. I just don't think he's ever going to tap into the power that he showed as a high school guy and showed a modicum flash of at times in 2021 and 2022. Love the approach. Love that he works counts. Technically has probably the second or third biggest hit in Seattle Mariner history. It wasn't really shouldn't be a hit if we're being honest with you. And it was a play that was a weird play. I'll be curious to see in the comments how you guys were feeling at that moment because I'll be honest, I was super excited, but I was super concerned about what was happening with Bichette and Springer at the same time. That's just me. I'm an empathy guy. Like I'm one of those weirdos who like watches Law and Order, and I'm like hoping that the bad guy didn't do it. I'm like he seems like a nice guy, maybe that's a horrible attitude to have, but like I'm someone who feels sympathy pains for sure. Like my knee is starting to hurt a little bit just talking about it. And again, I'm old. But long story short, this team should have been more aggressive in trying to replace JP Crawford as the shortstop and moving maybe JP Crawford to second base, which I think JP Crawford would be an excellent second baseman, an excellent one. And you can live with the offensive problems, for lack of a better term, that he would provide there. But I'm concerned because he does not hit enough to be a below average defensive shortstop. And based on my eyes and some of the metrics that I've seen, and some metrics that I've seen that you guys haven't seen, not to humble brag, it's not great. It is not great. And Xander Bogaerts is not an elite defensive shortstop. Trey Turner is not an elite defensive shortstop. Dansby Swanson is an elite defensive shortstop. And who knows? Look, I always go back to with this thing. You guys probably all watched Parks and Recreation. There's this scene where they're coming out of the parking lot, and April, the Aubrey Plaza character, says, "Why aren't we moving?" And Ben Wyatt, the Adam Scott character, says, "Because other cars." And I always think that that is something that we forget about. It takes two to tango with this stuff. Those players have to have interest. Now, look, the front office's job should be to convince players to want to come to Seattle. And Seattle's, one of my favorite places in the entire world. I do understand that it is super far away from a lot of places. You kind of feel isolated. There's no kind of, it is an isolated place. So it does take some convincing, and you do have to overpay for some players. But you got to do it. There was a golden opportunity here to make this team better at the shortstop position. They have plenty of payroll flexibility. They always will. They didn't do it. And I know that a lot of this stuff is about team chemistry and how they love JP Crawford as a leader. And I love that. Don't get me wrong. I love that. It's important. Leadership on a baseball team is extremely important. It is tough to quantify, which is sometimes why it's a little harder to talk about. It is really hard to prove how much leadership matters, but it definitely matters. I spend very little time with coworkers anymore, like on a team basis. I'm loving my new RotoWire team, by the way. But like I talk to those guys for a couple hours a day at most. 162 days traveling with dudes. It matters. Chemistry absolutely matters. But you could have got that chemistry with JP Crawford as your second baseman. You could have. And I think it was a golden opportunity to make this team better at the shortstop position. But they chose not to. And they can say it's about chemistry. I think it's about money. I do. And I think this team is still horrified by the Robinson Cano contract and what they take the wrong lessons from the Robinson Cano contract, in my personal opinion. It's not that you don't pay players a lot of money. It's that paying one guy a lot of money and not paying a lot of other players a lot of money or getting good players is bad. You cannot in baseball. One great player is not going to do the trick. It never has. It never will. Please take a look at the Anaheim, Los Angeles, Sacramento, Washugo Valley Angels, whatever you want to call them. Look at what they have. Two of the greatest players of our generation You need more. And that's the takeaway they should have taken from the Robinson Cano deal, is you should have kept adding. But I think this team is terrified of the long-term contracts because the Robinson Cano era didn't work out. And that's not Cano's fault. It's the regime's fault. But yeah, this infield's really scary to me. There are a ton of. Well, it didn't look like I was doing jazz hands there for a second. There are a ton of ceiling plays here. It could go extremely well. There's a lot of volatility, a lot of volatility. And the good news is they have a system that, I think DePoto made a great point in that interview with Furness where he said, we don't consider our roster done by opening day. And I think Jerry DePoto has made a trade before. I'll have to look it up. But so, yeah, this team still could get better. And I'm still expecting that surprise addition before the end of the season or before the end of spring. I definitely think they're going to make some moves. But I do have some concerns. This is the most concerning area of the club, is that infield, particularly second, shortstop, and first base. Not in that order. But yeah, there's a lot of wide variety of outcomes, which is exciting and also pretty scary. Pretty scary if somebody who really wants this team to do well. But yeah, what do you guys think of the infield? Do you think that they are? Where would you rank this infield in the American League? Like, is this a top 5 infield? Is this a top 10 infield? Somewhere in between? That's probably where I'd go, is somewhere in between. But again, a wide range of outcomes. So yeah, please comment, please like, please hit subscribe. A reminder to go to www.prospectml. No edit button on these. www.mlbprospectguides.com. Oh no, that's not right either. No edit button on these. Patreon.com/MLB Prospect Guides. I'll have a link in the thing. I think that's right. But yeah, please subscribe to that. We're going to have our daily newsletter soon. Really appreciate it. Please hit the like button on this. Please hit the subscribe button on this. I'm going to go enjoy the San Diego sun. But yeah, this infield, I don't know, man. I don't know.